Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video we're going to fit £11,000 worth of engine and £5,000 worth of gearbox and clutch, transmission, etc. to the chassis. Properly scary and properly exciting. I'm Roy Farr and this is my build of a Gardner Douglas 427 Mark IV. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. There's something new in the garage. Let's go have a look. Let's try not to wake it up. Alright Roy, enough of the dramatics. Let's get back to the video, shall we? So there she is. Look at that. Chevy LS3, 6.2 litres, V8, standard induction, hot cam, 495 horsepower. Yummy. So if you've been following the series so far, you'll know that stage 0 was a bit of procrastination and prep. Stage 1 was all about preparing the body, and there's been lots of different elements of that. But now I've skipped all the way through to stage 6. So what's that all about? Well, actually, I bought a rolling chassis previously. So if you remember, we had a full backbone chassis with the brakes and some of the brake lines and the rear diff all fitted, all in place. That was built beforehand. Now, some people choose to build that themselves, but in my case, that's all done already. But actually, people can choose to build the body first and do all of that and all the cutting, or they can build the chassis first. Well, the way this is working, if you go back to video number 3 in the series, my plan had, I think it was about 11 different stages, and stage 6 is all the engine and the chassis and so on. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to talk through the engine, the gearbox, and start going through what's stage 6, all the mechanicals, and then when the body comes back, we'll come back and we'll go to stage 1, 2, 3, etc. and fit all those bits and pieces to the body. So wanting to get this right and not making any rookie mistakes, I spoke to Andy at the factory before I embarked on any of these bits and pieces, and he gave me some great hints and tips. So with a rolling chassis, the first thing we're going to do before we put the engine or the gearbox in the car is we're going to note the serial number from the back of the engine. Very easy to do that when the engine's not fitted, a little bit harder to do when it's in the chassis, much harder to do when the body's on top as well. So let's do that first. That's step 1. Step 2, we're then going to fit the prop shaft onto the diff. Now again, really important to do this first before the engine and gearbox goes in. If you fit the engine and gearbox, take your hoist away, give it back, you're going to find it really difficult to get the prop shaft in because of the length of the spline. You'll end up having to take the diff out, which is a bit of a nightmare. So do that bit next. Step 3, we're then going to take the chassis front brace and cross brace off. That's the bit that sits around about where the radiator is, just behind the radiator. As you look at it, that's going to help you get the engine and gearbox down and lowered into the engine bay. Step 4, we're actually going to take the chassis top covers off, so those plates that sit along the top, much easier to manoeuvre things in and see what you're doing with those out of the way. Step 5, we're going to need to take the selector plate off the top of the gearbox. That's going to make it a lot easier to rotate that gearbox down and underneath the transmission tunnel and then have it pop up in the right place. Step 6, we're then going to fit the temperature sensor in the back of the block. Now, I didn't have this at the time, but my body's not back yet. Well, my body's here, but the body for the car's not back yet. So I've got some time to fit that with plenty of access around the rolling chassis without the body in place. Step 7, we're then going to fit 4 2-inch 50mm bolts into the corners of the cylinder head, and I'll show you that in a little while. That's for lifting the engine using the hoist. Those are the points to lift it from. Step 8, we're then going to lift the engine and the gearbox off the crate and start lifting it into the air. Step 9, and for me, because I couldn't get the engine alloy adapter plates onto the engine whilst it was sitting on the pallet itself, they're going to have to be fitted whilst the engine is on the hoist, so kind of while it's floating there. We're going to have to make sure that the engine mounting rubber plates, the rubber mounting blocks, have been ground down to fit, and I'll explain that in a little while, but they'll go onto the engine just before we drop it into the engine bay itself. Step 11, we've got to check the clearance of any of the bolts we're fitting just to make sure there's no fouling on anything. Step 12, we're then going to hoist in the engine and gearbox. Step 13, when we've got the engine just laying on those V-mounting plates in the chassis itself, we're then going to just raise it back up slightly and drop in those engine mounting rubber blocks, because it's much, much easier to fit those that way than it is to put them on the engine and then drop it in, and they'll get in the way and start fouling the chassis. Step 14, we're then going to fit the 4.5 inch, the long bolts that go through those engine mounting rubber blocks, and fit an appropriate number of washers front and back. And then step 15, we're going to refit that chassis diagonal and cross brace on the front, now that the engine and gearbox is fitted. And then finally, step 16, the headers, the exhaust, the starter motor, the alternator, etc. They can all be fitted now the engine and gearbox is in place. It's just a lot easier to do that rather than worrying about knocking them on the side of the chassis as you're fitting it in. Much, much better with that clearance. And that'll be it. So let's get cracking. So along with the crate engine, we've got a load of extra parts. We've got the gearbox, we've got the clutch, we've got all sorts of bits and pieces that we need to now fit to the car. So let's have a look. So what have we got? We've got an alternator. I have to fit that onto the front of the engine. We've got a starter motor. We've got some bolts for the gearbox here, bolts for the alternator. The whole gearbox is under there. We've got the bell housing. There's various bolts and bits and pieces in there. We've got the clutch pack. I'll open all of that up in a second. And then we've got various bits and pieces in here for the exhaust. And we've got all sorts of gubbins down here. We've got O2 sensors. We've got the front belt. We've got somewhere buried in there is the prop shaft, and then over here there's the fan sitting on top of the chassis here for the moment. We've got a couple of bits of the radiator. We've got the under tray, and the radiator's just sitting underneath that. And in here we've got more bits and pieces. What have we got? Clutch hydraulics, air horns down there. We've got the cherry bombs. We've got the headers there. All sorts of bits and pieces going on. Manifold gasket, gaskets. Excellent. Right, let's get cracking. Of course, the other couple of parts we've got are the two exhausts. Lovely couple of stainless steel exhausts here coming up to those lovely weld-in cats at the top there. Really looking forward to fitting those. That will really look lovely under the car. And no, don't make a lovely noise. So what's the plan for today? So, engine still covered in plastic with some microfiber towels on top. Take that, take the clutch pack, fit that to the engine, fit the bell housing, fit the gearbox, put all of that on the back, lift all of that up, pick up the dog, put all that in the... No, not the dog, just the engine and the gearbox, and we put all of that in the chassis with my good friend Steve's engine hoist. So let's get started. Okay, so the clutch pack. Let's have a little look at the different bits and pieces we've got here. So we've got the clutch plate cover itself. That's quite a heavy piece of kit. Let's move that to one side for a second. And we've got the clutch itself. And underneath we've got the flywheel here. So the first thing you need to do is to fit the pilot bearing. So this is going to sit just inside here. We just want to get this in so that it's flush. The way to do this is to take, in this case, something like an 18mm socket. We can pop an extension on if we need, put that on the front, and we just need to tap it in gently until it's located, and then push it all the way in until it's flush. There we go, nice and flush. Right, now it's time for the flywheel. There we go, so that's lined up. There are 6 bolt holes, and then we have this extra hole here which just pushes through to a recess in the back of the engine there, which we can use to then push the flywheel off should we need to change it at a later date. Next thing we need to do with this guy, we have these flywheel bolts, and they do have a little bit of thread lock on here, but the received wisdom is you add a bit of RTV silicone to these as well, because these will actually go all the way through and there's a risk of oil leaking through into the flywheel. So this really needs to be a solid seal with some silicone. So let's apply a bit of that and get some of those in there. I'm just going to put a couple of these in just to line up the flywheel, then I'll take them out again and then put the silicone on. So we'll just give these a couple of turns just to line it up, make sure it's all okay. Yeah, that seems fine. So this is the RTV silicone I was talking about. This is straight from Halford's, instant gasket RTV silicone, just used in this case you can create seals between components, but useful here just to seal these bolts in here so we don't get any oil coming through from the engine into the clutch pack and then corroding and making the clutch slip. So let's just get a bit of that on. So with the 6 bolts in place, we just need to hand tighten them up now, and we'll go across each time. So we just hand tighten that one, and so with them hand tightened we then have to torque the bolts in stages. So I'll put the numbers up on the screen in a moment, but same principle. We start on one side, we switch to the opposite side, and then we work our way across in a cross-shaped pattern. The measurements are going to be 15 pound-foot or 20 newton meters for the first time, and we do that around all 6. Then we go to 37 pound-foot and 50 newton meters, and then finally 74 pound-foot and 100 newton meters. So quite a bit on this one. So let's start. So I've got the torque wrench here at the moment, sitting there on nothing. We just need to bring that up to, well, you can see that on there, but there's a 20 on there. So we're going to bring this guy all the way up to the 20. And then when that comes around to the 0, that should be the 20 there. There's a 20 with the click. We'll come down to this one and carry on. So that's the 20. Now we move up to 50 newton meters. And then moving up to 74 pound-foot and 100 newton meters. Sometimes helpful to pop a screwdriver here just to stop the flywheel from turning whilst you're trying to get the torque into the bolts. So we just go around those. Now, next thing to cover here is that the flywheel, whilst it's straight from the factory and it's brand new, occasionally manufacturers will give the flywheel a very thin coating of oil, which would be disastrous for a clutch. You want it as clean and as clear as possible. And the reason they occasionally do that is that if the clutch pack and the flywheel sits in a box for too long, then you could get surface rust appearing on what is basically a machined raw face. So we want to make sure that's really clean. So a little bit of brake and parts cleaner on the front and just wipe that off, and that'll just make sure we've got absolutely no oil or residue left on the front. So a bit of that and a nice clean cloth. Then we've got the clutch plate itself, and whether you can see just up there, it says flywheel side on that side. So this is where we go, that goes in there, just slots in there straight like that. So we take the clutch alignment tool, spline, and put that through the clutch, and then that will align it with the flywheel side back towards the flywheel. That will just hold that in place. So we just leave that, we get that aligned up in there, we just leave that in there for the moment. So with the clutch installed, we've then got the clutch pressure plate to put on the back here. Now we've got a handful of, just 3 of these locating pins. They're going to slot through 3 holes on the side, on the edges here of the pressure plate. So we've got one up here, one there, and one sitting just down here somewhere. And that just helps us locate the clutch in the right place, or the clutch pack in the right place. And then same as the flywheel, we've got 6 bolts that will go through, and we'll torque them up in stages, running across and increasing it until that's all done as well. I'm just putting these in at the moment again, just to make sure that everything's lined up. The pins should help with that, but they all seem to be going in okay. I'll just check the last few. Yeah, I think they're okay. So again, a bit like the flywheel bolts, in this case we need a little bit of Loctite or thread lock on these bolts, just to make sure we don't get any vibrations pulling them loose. So we'll just give that a little bit of that. This is again same sort of product as before, from Granville, again from Halford. It's just a few quid, but a little bit of this on the ends of the bolts, and that will keep them nice and secure. Now, same as before with the flywheel, we've got to go up in stages. So we're going to start with 11 pound-foot or 15 newton meters of torque, then 26 pound-foot, 36 newton meters of torque, 41 pound-foot and 55 newton meters, and finally 52 pound-foot and then 70 newton meters. So let's start with 11 and 15 newton meters. Okay, clutch pressure plate, clutch itself and flywheel installed. Next thing, over the back of this, we need to fit the bell housing. So this guy, lovely piece of aluminium, nice and light, and the job of that is to really serve as the adapter between the engine and the gearbox, which will be coming on next. And it just protects the clutch and all of those components in there, keeps all the muck out. So let's get that on. Right, with the crate engine support brackets that were holding the crate engine onto the pallet just undone and moved out of the way on each side, we can now pop the bell housing on. So the bell housing goes on this way up. There's a bulge in the bottom right hand side there with that F written on it. No idea what the F stands for. Pop it in the comments if you do. That's where the starter motor will engage through the other side there. So let's just slide this over the top for the time being. So that sits there. And now another load of bolts to install. Again, just going to pop a couple in just to make sure we're all lined up. Okay, so really no need for thread lock on these because we've got spring washers on there, so they will hold these bolts nice and tight. So let's just get these finger tight all the way around. So the last thing we need to do now, before we fit the gearbox onto the bell housing and onto the engine, is to fit the release bearing. Now when you have a 3-pedal car and you're using a clutch, you press the clutch, it's the release bearing that presses the clutch plate in and out of the bell housing there to take up the drive or to release it. So you can have a manual fork type clutch, so a very mechanical mechanism, or you can have what we're going to use in this case, which is a hydraulic release bearing. So this is going to sit over the main transmission shaft here, and the two connectors there will face just out of the transmission, and then we'll connect them with a couple of braided hoses. So let's pop that on. That's how that fits. What I think I'll do is I'll connect up the hoses. Might be a little bit easier to put those on before fitting this. And then it's just a couple of M6 16mm bolts that are just going to screw through this and then lock that in place. So we've got two braided hoses here. They've got a 90-degree bend on one end and a straight connector on the other. These straight connectors will go onto the connectors on the engine bay, and the elbows here will fit on the side of the gearbox and connect into that hydraulic release bearing. Then for the larger of the two connectors, because the braided hoses are two slightly different sizes, there's a small one which fits on the top. The larger one has this connector here, and there's actually an adapter that comes along to connect the two. So I've loosely fitted the braided hoses now with the angles, just finger tight at the moment. Just looking at how they fit and the fact that the bell housing flares outwards, I'd say if this one was to be facing forwards, it would foul the bell housing. Facing upwards, it looks like it's just about touching, and I don't really want it rubbing whilst the car's moving forwards and vibrating, so I'm going to push this one back a little bit and set it like that, where it shouldn't come into contact with the bodywork. And this one, I think, given that it's sufficiently far out, it'll be fine as it is. And then of course, once it's all fitted, these two will actually come together anyway and be routed up into the engine bay. So I've got an adjustable and a 12mm on here just to tighten this guy up. And I've got a couple of 14mm on this one. I have to take that out again to do that one up, I think. Okay, bit of thread lock on the bolts and we're good. The other thing to remember with this quick fit adapter, which allows this connection of this braided hose here, is it comes with a quick release. This is very similar to the British speed fit plumbing connection, so it just presses in and there's a little collar in here that moves up and down, but when you want to release it, this presses on. You push the collar down and then you can separate the adapter from the hydraulic release bearing. Last thing to do before we connect up the gearbox, spline lubricant. I need to put some of that on here just to make sure that that's properly lubricated before it goes into the engine. So another small job we have to do is to swap out this thermostat outlet for this guy. This is just a straight version of the above, bit of aluminium as well, but this needs to come on and replace this one like this with the bulbous side facing the inside of the engine and the angle facing outside. So we'll just quickly swap those over. Looks like a little locating lug there for the side of the rubber gasket. Okay, good. All done. Okay, so another task is to fit the alternator. Now, you can hear me straining because it's heavy. This guy needs to sit just on the corner here. And I was hoping to do as much as I can before hoisting up the engine on the engine hoist and then getting it ready to lift into the car. But as you can probably see right now, there is no way that alternator is going to fit on here because all the crate engine support is in the way. This strap I could move, but we've got all of this supporting the engine underneath, so I'm going to have to wait until I've lifted the engine up on the hoist and then fit the alternator either then whilst it's hanging on the hoist or when it's actually already in the car, which is no big deal because remember we don't have the body on the car, so we'll have plenty of access to get around the engine bay. One job for later. So it's time to fit the prop shaft, and this isn't a simpler job because we've got to take a look at the length of the bolts that go through from the prop shaft through to the diff. The ones supplied are just ever so slightly too long, so we actually have to grind them down. So let me just show you what we're talking about first, and then we'll just quickly grind all four down. I've done one already, but let's just take a quick look. So what we're talking about, we've got a couple of bolts here. This is the length of the bolt supplied. You've got this threadless collar at the top, and you've got the rest of the thread there, and we actually need to get it down to this size. So we do still need the threadless collar. There's no point just getting a shorter length threaded bolt. We actually want this piece in there to sit within the join between the prop shaft itself and the diff at the back there. So we actually just need to grind down these bolts from what they are to, I reckon, about 30 mil or maybe just a couple of millimeters less. But I'm looking at mine here and the fitment seems to be about 30 mil, and we can get a nut on the back, and then we've got clearance to the back of the diff here where the longer bolt would otherwise foul the diff. So let's just cut one of those. So a bit of masking tape to show where we're going to cut to. I'm just going to pop this in a vise and then just cut it down with a 6-inch grinder with a metal disc. Could of course use a hacksaw, but there's much more fun with a grinder. As long as we don't burn the kitchen, the garage, or the rest of the house down, of course. I'm just going to turn this round so we don't get a burr in the middle or on one edge. We can then file down afterwards and make sure the nut fits okay over the top. And we just take the burrs off the top. And my able-bodied assistant, thank you Debbie McGee. There we go, that's going on okay.
Just off camera on that.
That's okay. There we go, so that one's going on okay. It's a little bit tight, but that'll often be the case when the threads are a little bit burred at the top. But that's on okay. Now we can put all four in the prop shaft. So here we are with all four bolts installed I just come over the top here, hopefully you can see the clearance we're talking about. Let's see if we can get in there and show you. There we go, you can see just down here we've got the shorter bolts now that won't foul the leading edge of the diff here. And of course sometimes this is quite difficult to get access to, so we've taken the top tunnel cover off, and of course if you want to try and get better access in here, either jack the back of the car up so you can rotate the wheels, or simply move the car back and forth and you can rotate the prop shaft through the diff there. Okay, so looking at these engine mounting plates, it's a little bit complex how we set up all of these bolts, because we've got several bolts and they're all different lengths. And this little groove is there to accept the rubber engine mounting block, which will sit on top. You can see there's 3 holes there. They will sit on those 3, and there's a ridge on the back here. You can just about make that out. That sits in the groove there. So that's how it sits. You bolt this to the engine first, and then this guy sits over the top. Now, various different bolts to do that. So first things first, you're going to have this guy, this countersunk one. He's going to go in the slot at the top, and that will screw into one of the 4 slots that go into the engine itself. The problem is that when you then come to mount this guy, the very top edge of that little ridge will actually foul on that countersunk screw. So we're actually going to need to grind the top of that off just in the centre of the screen there, just so that will sit flush, otherwise it will wobble back and forth. The rest of the bolts, it's slightly complicated. The longest one seems to go through the bottom here, and that will go through the actual engine mounting itself. There's no thread cut in the alloy plate here, so that will go straight through into one of the 4 holes that go into the block. So that's the longest one. And then you've got 2 of the next shortest ones. They will then go through this plate straight into the block on the side. And then finally the 2 smallest screws, bolts running away from me. The final 2 there will go through the top of this plate, and of course they're not going all the way through to the block. They're just securing the rubber engine mounting to the alloy plate itself. So that's how all of that hangs together. Look at the 2 engine mounts here. This is one I've just done. I've just ground down the top here with a grinder just to remove and nibble out the top of that ridge. That's what fits into that alloy plate. But if I just grab the other one as an example, when you pop these guys into there, once the countersunk screw is in place, this ridge gets in the way. So you actually have to pull the top off and just grind that down a bit, otherwise it won't sit flush. So what we're looking for is, with the countersunk screw in place and the top part of the rubber engine block bracket ground down, just simply for these 2 to come together and sit nice and flush. So hopefully we can see that those 2 are nice and together, and we've got the alignment there with the screw holes, the bolt holes. Perfect. Waffle bites. Time for a tea break. So where are we? We're getting ready to lift the engine and the gearbox, and it's starting to get a bit squeaky bum time, I have to say. We've got the hoist set up, we've got the leveler. Conveniently, when we need a couple of M10 2-inch high tensile steel bolts, the ones that actually are supposed to be fitted for the gearbox are really useful for this. So we've got this hooked up, so we've got those in the top corners of the cylinder head on each side, same on the front, and then we'll get this hook in there and hopefully ratchet the handle the other side and start to level it out. That'll help us get the engine in. just for a bit of orientation, with the prop shaft in place. And you see the spline that comes out. This is how much of a gap I had. Oh, get that in focus there, sorry. That's how much of a gap I had. So here is the rubber seal on the back of the gearbox and the spline going into it. If you've got your engine mounts in the wrong place, then this will be much, much longer and the gearboxes will be too far away. So this is roughly the sort of clearance you should be looking for. So we've got the engine fully mounted in the chassis now. Thought it might be useful just to show everyone how this alloy engine plate adapter and the engine mount fits on. So I showed you a little bit about this earlier, but the plate itself, this is the left hand side of the engine as you look at it from the front. So there we go, like that. And this alloy plate, the pointy out bit, let's call it the P-shaped piece, the piece that protrudes slightly from the edge, sits on the right hand side here as I look at it. So that's pointing towards the front of the engine, and it's the same and reversed on the other side, so the pointy bit towards the front. And that gives space for the 3 bolts, 2 at the top and 1 underneath here, that go through the rubber engine mounting block. And then the alloy plate has 3 bolts that secure it to the block first. So when you look at the bolts, as I mentioned earlier, you'll have one really long one, you'll have 2 medium-sized ones, and you'll have 2 short ones. So the 2 medium-sized ones go directly into the plate and into the engine block. There is a countersunk one that sits in that groove that goes into the engine block, and those 3 go on first, and you leave the last one empty. So just 3 to put the plate on, and once you've done that, the engine mounting block can be slotted in place when you get the engine really close. Don't put it on to start off with. Get the engine lowered down to the point where it's just hovering over this, and then put this rubber block in place at the last minute. And then you put the 2 shortest bolts through the mount and into the plate, and they just secure into the plate itself. And in the final bolt, the longest one, which you can't really see here, goes in through the bottom and goes straight through the rubber block through the alloy plate and becomes that 4th connection into the engine. So I hope that's helpful. So there she is, all fitted. Just got to put the cross beams back on here and the diagonal that slots in there as well, just to finish off that part, but obviously you have to take those off before you fit the engine in the first place. Looks quite big, doesn't it, sitting in there on the chassis. I mean, looking at how high she comes up, you can see there's quite a bit of engine protruding above the chassis there, but once you've got the body on, then all of that is going to look relatively normal again. But with the chassis, it seems like it's sitting quite high, but just I guess for a bit of orientation again, let's have a look underneath and see what the sort of clearance is. Now, well, we can see that there. There we go. Coming across, we've got, what else have we got? So we can see this black tube is just we'll have to tie that down somewhere, but this is just a vent tube for the gearbox. And we've got the hoses from the hydraulic release bearing there. Let's just step over and have a look at those. So there's the hoses from the hydraulic release bearing coming out. You can see the oil filter down there, nice and easy to access. See the amount of space we've got to fit those headers. There's not a massive amount of room in there, but you can see where they're going to go. And the other thing over here, just come around this way for a second, I can see in there, this is where the starter motor will go. So on the left hand side of the engine, again as you look at it, that will bolt in there and connect with the flywheel, which is just about visible in there. Here's my friend Steve's hoist. Now that we've used it, I thought we'd just talk about this briefly. This is a Clark hoist. It's rated at 1 ton, but as you can see, it's only rated at 1 ton on the furthest left increment here. The further out that you put the boom, the lower the weight is. So that's something to bear in mind when you're looking at these. For us, because the legs on this thing were so long, and just through there the crate and the pallet that the engine came on, the legs wouldn't go under it. So for us, the first problem was we'd actually need to extend the boom all the way out to its longest setting, just so we could actually get the hook on the end there, on the top of the engine, on the crate. Otherwise it just wouldn't reach with the legs not getting any further. So for us, we had to go all the way to the end, which gave us a maximum limit of 250 kilos. When I looked up the weight of the LS3, and you do get different numbers, obviously various different fitments and accessories and so on, but I worked out that I think the engine and the gearbox, as it stood, without the alternator, without the starter motor and everything, came in at something like 220 to 230 kilos. So we took a risk and went with the fourth setting with the boom all the way out, and that worked out well. So happy days. And yes, the astute of you may have noticed in the background I've got some wheels. I'm not going for the standard Hallebrand type replicas. I'm going to go for something a little bit different. But I think they'll suit the car. I hope they'll suit the combination with the paintwork, but I'm not going to tell you what they are yet. We'll wait for another video for that one. And just another quick shout out to Gary Carter again, without whom I wouldn't have 4 build wheels to actually have got this far before these wheels have turned up. So thanks again, Gary. Really appreciate the loan of those. I'll get them back to you as soon as I can once I've got some tyres for these wheels. So thanks again, buddy. The other thing we had to do in fitting the engine and gearbox was actually to remove this gear selector. Now, I didn't film that because, frankly, it was too stressful sorting everything out, getting the engine in. And once it was up in the air, we didn't want to play around with anything. But there are 6 bolts here. You can see them, just 4 at the back there, and then 2 just over the front here as well. Take those off before you lift the hoist, before you lift the engine on the hoist. You will need to just tap this base here. There's actually a rubber gasket that sits in here between the two. You'll need to tap this with a rubber mallet or pop a screwdriver underneath just to prise it off, and then the whole thing just pops off. And the gear selector here, it has like a little ball on the bottom that just fits into a particular lug. There is a second one here, so you can rotate it and you can have the gear lever a bit further forward for some cars that might need a different fitment, but obviously with this one here, this is the right way around as it comes straight from the factory with the selector at the back. Because you break the rubber seal, it's useful to put something else back in here just to give it seal. Now, I didn't have another rubber seal, but I've got some of that instant gasket that I used before, so a little bit of that on there, a little bit of sealant around there will do that just fine. And tighten these nuts back up, and away we go. And just one thing I wanted to show you really quickly towards the end there. Some of you may have noticed that the gearbox chassis mounting plate bolts that I put in here, I'd put them actually pointing downwards. That's actually not the right way round. They were just in there for convenience because you can just pop them through and leave them laying there. The best thing to do is to fit the bolts upwards from underneath. That way you've only got the head of the bolt underneath, which gives you much more ground clearance than what it does just by screwing the bolts up through these lock nuts. And it might only save a few millimeters, but it's enough to make a bit of a difference. So this is the right way around. So that's the end of another video. Delighted we've been able to get the engine and gearbox in one go, in one day, without any major dramas. But like I said throughout the video, it was a bit of a squeaky bum time during the fitting itself. Really glad that's out of the way. What are we doing next? We'll be on to fitting the exhaust, the alternator, the starter motor, and all those bits and pieces. Only a couple more weeks now, and I think the body will be ready to come back. So I'm excited to see that. But we're still going to be fixing some of the bits and pieces onto the chassis for the next couple of weeks. So hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.